Having been in a multitude of different leadership positions in my life, I know a thing or two about it. And I can say definitively at a minimum that it's not easy. So in this video, I want to share with you what I believe to be just a few of the most important principles of what constitutes good leadership. To begin with, clarify the standard. Whenever you're issuing directives, it's not enough to just say, I want this task completed. You have to define what completion actually means, because different people might have different interpretations of that, and it's not fair to assume that your interpretation is the only one that exists. And furthermore, it's not fair to hold somebody accountable when they fail to complete a task and you didn't clarify what the standards actually were. So for example, if you ask for, say, a status update on something, then you have to define what that entails. Do you want percentage completion of constituent parts thus far? Do you want estimated time until full completion? What do you want? So you make sure that you deliberately clarify that so that you're not confusing people or wasting anybody's time. Second of all, be humble. And this is a big mistake that I see a lot of people making is whenever they're in a leadership position, they let that power get to their heads. They start to develop egos, they start mistreating people, talking down to them, and just generally assuming that they're better than everybody else just because they're in that position of authority. When the reality is the exact opposite. It shouldn't be a me versus you mentality, but instead, we are all here to work together as a team to get the job done. So be approachable, listen for feedback, and acknowledge that you could sometimes be wrong. You're not always right just because you're in that leadership position. And if you disagree, just ask yourself, why were you given that power in the first place? Was it for the ego gratification so you could go around shitting on people just to make yourself feel tough? Or was it a resource that was given to you so that you could more effectively achieve whatever mission it is that your organization or team was tasked with? And I'd argue that it's the latter. The third principle is lead by example. So whatever expectations you have of your subordinates, you've got to be capable of meeting those standards and expectations yourself. Because on one hand, if you can't, then your subordinates won't respect you. They're going to look at it as, well, why should I have to be able to do this if my leader can't do it? But more importantly, it informs your perspective, because how can you know that whatever you're expecting is possible to meet in the first place? It could very well be an impossible task. And if you're incapable or unwilling of meeting those standards yourself, then how can you know that, right? So you have to be able to do it in the first place yourself. So for example, when I was in the Army, I had the expectation that my soldiers would be good runners, that they would keep up in the formation runs, that they would be able to run 2 miles on the PT tests in less than 14 minutes at least. And I couldn't have that expectation if I myself couldn't do it. So I worked on my own running ability on my own spare time, and I made sure that I could keep up on the formation runs and I could run 2 miles in less than 14 minutes. And as a result, not only did I know that it was possible, but also I earned the respect of my subordinates because they could see that they had something that they could look up to and work towards. Now, effective communication, which is the next principle, is perhaps one of the most notable, and it's comprised of at least 3 components. The first is that effective communication is frequent and regular. So you've got to be scheduling regular face-to-face conversations with your subordinates at intervals of, say, something like once every 2 weeks, once a month, or something like that, instead of just leaving it up to whenever you feel like it. Because in that case, you're just only going to end up saying something when somebody does something wrong, rather than recognizing when they do something well as well. Because in that case, it's harder to recognize. Things just continue as normal when people do what they're supposed to do and when they do things right. But you do have to take an effort to recognize that as well. Because if you're not, and you're only criticizing somebody for something that they did wrong, then what kind of a message does that send? That you don't care about whenever they do something right, and there's no incentive to continue those behaviors from here. So naturally following from that, the second component is take the good with the bad. Don't just look for reasons for why somebody is a bad subordinate, look for what they've done well as well. Now, the third component is be constructive and not destructive. So when you are criticizing somebody for their shortcomings in these face-to-face dialogues, you have to be constructive about it instead of sending the message that you did something wrong, so now you're a terrible person and I have no faith in your ability to continue from here. Instead, it's got to be, here are these shortcomings, but here's how we're going to work on that. Here's the plan of action so that the next time we talk, we can review and look at your progress. And most importantly, here are my responsibilities as a leader to help guide you towards success. Because you do have a responsibility as a leader to do that. A lot of people make the mistake of assuming that it's entirely on the subordinate, it's entirely their fault for them being the way that they are. And although there is an element of personal responsibility there, it doesn't mean that you're devoid of any responsibility at all whatsoever as a leader. Because if you were, then what reason is there for you to be there in the first place? There's no point for your existence. So to be a good leader, you do actually have to put conscious effort forth towards it. Don't think that just because you've been appointed in that position, then your work is complete, because it's the exact opposite. Your work is just beginning. So take care of your subordinates and work together with them as a team, and your success rate will be much higher. So if this helps, try it out. Let me know if it works for you, and I'll see you next time.